Hello, everyone. Today is Friday, October 16th. As always, I'm your host for Collectibles and Coffee, Edward Gwynn. Today, we'll be asking ourselves the question, are we really beating the market? And essentially, what that means is, in the context of investing, in the context of trying to maximize your money, are we really getting the most bang for our buck? Are we honestly better just putting our money in something else? This is this is like a lot of things that I say, kind of a tough pill to swallow. Um, a lot of us who do this, we do this because we enjoy our hobbies. We look to offset the costs by putting our money in the hobby in our hobbies in a certain way. We are looking to ultimately spend less in the future. This is why there's speculation. This is why people hedge their bets. Um, But at the end of the day, if we're looking at this from an investment perspective, it's important to remember: are we beating the market? Are we maximizing our dollars, and are we getting the most out of it? And I think this is something that is, again, not the most glamorous discussion, but it is something that is important to note. This is something for people to consider. This is something for people to think about, because at the end of the day, any investment, no matter what it is, it has to financially make sense. If it doesn't financially make sense, we may need to reconsider options and reevaluate our game plan. And then lastly, as a way to kind of wrap out the week, we will take a brief look at some upcoming PWC auctions. If you had listened to yesterday's episode, one of the things I discussed was what do we do now, and trying to buy the next best thing. PWCC, usually most of the things that are being sold heavily in the spotlight, but by being able to look at those auctions, being able to see what's being offered, you have a better idea of what's going on in the marketplace. You know what's going up for sale, what people are trying to sell off. It just kind of gives you an overall idea of what you should be buying, what you should be paying, and how much demand there is for different products. So two things today. We'll just hop right in. So yesterday when we were talking about things that are worth buying, what do we want to spend our money on, what we should be buying, one of the most important questions we have to ask ourselves is, how long do I want to wait to see my return, right? Is this something, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm a business, I have to be concerned about cash flow. I don't necessarily have the luxury of sitting on things as a business. A lot of things have to be bought and then sold to generate money. That way the cash keeps flowing. That way there is a constant cash flow in order to be buying something else, and then you sell that for profit. You have more cash than you started with. That's the idea of a business. It does operate on a very different axis than most people. For most people who aren't operating as a business, who aren't doing this with their livelihoods on the line, and you can afford to invest, you can afford to wait, then it becomes a different animal. And the nature of investing is you have to be able to identify, if are you buying something to flip it quickly. Usually this is the case with standard product. This is the case with things that are in demand. In print, the demand is high, the supply is high. You have to be able to capitalize on that opportunity. When demand starts to drop but supply is high, then that's when prices decrease. This isn't something that's terribly difficult to understand, right? If we just think about Magic, if we think about Pokemon, just cards that are in print right now that you can go to your local game store, you can go to Target, you can go to Walmart and just buy off the shelves, right? Your opportunity to make money is not high. If you are looking to do it, it's going to be a quick flip. If you open something that's spectacular, if you bought a booster box, for example, and you just wanted to keep the cards that you plan on playing with from Pokemon or Magic, and you just want to sell off all the extras, your opportunity to make money is not very high. This is definitely not an investment. This is just a simple flip. This is, you bought at a certain number, and then you're just looking to get out of it for slightly more. Oftentimes when this is the case, you shouldn't be expecting to make that much. Again, simply because there is a lot of downward pressure on the price. There's not a lot of reason for the price to be high, but rather the supply is so high that you're fighting against a lot of other people. Sure, you may have a lot of people who are wanting that, that chase mythic, that chase rare, in the set, but there's a lot of people that can satisfy this demand. There's a lot of people, you have stores that are opening products, they're buying these cards in, they're just turning around and selling them right away. So a quick flip is usually you're making a small margin. Sometimes you catch a lucky break. You bought a $4 pack and you open up the best card, right? If you're opening up an Omnath or something, right, and you're cashing out for like $15, right? You're getting triple your money back, which is not a lot of money, but you're still getting triple your money, which is fine. That's the nature of a flip. When we think about things that are investments, a lot of times people think of them in longer terms. A lot of things that people do hold for investments, people are holding for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, a long, long period of time. This is something that's fairly difficult for people to grasp, especially in the collectibles industry, mainly because this isn't something that is incredibly prevalent, because most of us are younger, right? For most of us who are in their 20s or 30s, right, we don't have things that have been around for 20 years because we're just not that old. That's why when you think about higher end collectibles, when you think about things like coins, people who collect paper money, people who collect stamps, people who collect old school comics, old sports cards, right? A lot of these things are inherently older. You're buying things that are oftentimes definitely older than us, right? No one buys a coin that's 30 years old because there's just simply too many of them minted. Right, same idea with sports cards. In the era of sports cards, that was really when sports cards were kind of entering a bubble. A lot of sports cards from the era kind of like the late 80s into the early 2000s, even a little bit before that, there were simply too many sports cards being printed. There were too many companies that had the licensing to these different sports organizations, to MLB, NFL, NBA, etc. So one player, one team may be printed by 3 different sports companies, and with the amount of product that they put out, there's just simply too much of it out there in order for it to have a real value. So in the context of our collectibles versus kind of the previous generation's collectibles, it's just a whole different scale of age. That's why a lot of those investments, they do tend to pan out for people a lot more, because you're holding on to, some of these comics, the golden age of comics, the silver age of comics. We're talking about comics that are like 60 plus years old at this point, right? The pieces of paper that are held together and that people have kept for 60 plus years. Some of these old comics go much, much older than that. Some of these comics are pushing like 80 years old at this point. And when people buy these things, right, it's unlikely that people who bought them back then were buying them for investment purposes, right? Simply because the collectible market hadn't existed on the scale that it exists today yet. People weren't on board with collectibles, people weren't on board with holding them for a long time. It just so happens that our generation, our age group, the people are trying to capture that nostalgia again. People are trying to go back and purchase these things that they had when they were little kids. It just so happens that some of these things that people are looking to purchase, some of this nostalgia that they're looking to recapture, maybe 40, 50, 60, 70 years old at this point. So in the context of investing, right, most people, when people invest traditional investments, people think about investments like buying real estate, buying stocks, buying bonds, money markets, your more traditional forms of investment, which some of these we'll look at today and we'll just kind of discuss, because when we're trying to revisit the question, are we really beating the market? It's important to put that level of context into what we're doing, because again, for a lot of people, when they ask, is this something that's worth pursuing, I have to tell them to honestly ask themselves to be realistic and to think if what they're doing is worth their time and if the money they're getting out of it is worthwhile. I know no shortage of people that are in this hustle. They think that this is a glamorous lifestyle. To be perfectly honest, it's really not that glamorous. It's a lot of work. I've mentioned the book, Gary Ray, a 5-year guide to middle class income, right? That's kind of the reality of owning a game store. A lot of people who own game stores don't do so to get rich. That's just not the reality of things. Right? There's very, very few game stores that are truly successful in the context of whatever your metric of success is. Most of the game stores don't survive. You have a very, very high turnover rate on game stores, and the people who actually make it to being a game store is already a very small subset of people who just hustle cards as their hobby, as their pastime. And then a very small subset of those game stores do go on to become successful, and then you have like a single digit number of stores in the country, in the US, that are on the scale of truly being successful, right? A la Card Kingdom, Star City, Channel Fireball, what have you, right? There's just so few of these out there. They just don't really exist because the barrier is so high. So for most of us, when we think about these things just on a very small individual scale as investments, we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to think, are we getting the most return on our money? And when people are starting to mix their hobby with their investment, it does get more sticky. Again, I think there's a lot of value. I think there's no shortage of people out there who look at this as simply a means to finance their hobby. I think that's perfectly acceptable. A lot of people do this to make the game cheaper for them. Playing Magic, keeping up with Magic, playing Pokemon, keeping up with Pokemon. All these things, they're not cheap. Collecting sports cards, right? If you want to be keeping cards for yourself, right, which a lot of people do. People like to collect their favorite teams. People collect their favorite players, their rookies, etc. If you're keeping cards for yourself, then that's potentially money that you're not building. That's you're holding on to an asset. Yesterday we talked about things that are unrealized gains. A lot of people seem to say that, man, I'm cardboard rich, right? Which is kind of a funny way to think about it, right? They say that they have a collection that's worth, $10,000 or whatever. And even if they bought it a few years ago, even if they only spent like $1,000 on a collection, they see a 10x return, it's an unrealized gain. We talked about this yesterday. They haven't seen a penny back. At this point, all they know is that all they should know is that they're $1,000 in the red until they start selling that collection, until they start selling their cards off and actually seeing their return, their gain. It's an unrealized gain. And then that's not considering the fact that some people play with their cards. People like to keep decks. People like to keep things in their collection. People like to keep things in their cube. People like to keep Pokemon cards because they like collecting them because the art is cool, because it's their favorite Pokemon, what have you. Right? These are all things that are going to take away from your investment. If you're looking at this in terms of an investment vehicle, and you're looking about this in terms of growing your wealth long term, you have to be critical of yourself, again, because I think most people, they aren't valuing their time properly. They aren't valuing their money high enough. They're not trying to stretch their dollar. And again, this is a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. But I think if you're looking at things, if you're honestly trying to think of things as what can I invest in that will pay off long term, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to think, and you have to look at, does my investment actually beat the market? So what does being the market actually mean? Right? So being the market simply means looking at what people deem as an investment nowadays, right? It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if you're trying to buy a booster box, or you're trying to buy a case of the standard product and stash it away for a few number of years, what have you, right? Does it beat the market? And what we mean is, if you take your money, if you take that, in the case of a booster box, right? Let's say you buy a case for right now for $550, for example, $500. Let's make it a round number. We want to be able to compare it to traditional means of investment, right? If we take that $500, what can we do with it in that time? And if we expect to put some of these things away for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, right? Can we get more value out of our money? And when we think about this, right, like, what are some traditional forms of investment? For $500, right, it's kind of hard to invest in a lot. That's just not a lot of capital. That's just not a lot to get going. But for some people, that's what they can afford, which is perfectly fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? The purpose of this channel is to be accessible. I realize there are people out there that may only have a small amount of money to play with. Not everyone is, not everyone, can make rap videos, become Logic, and spend $220,000 on a Pokemon card, right? That's the reality situation. And I think that there is some level of investing to be had for everyone. But for $500, right, if that's going to be the example that we get started, right, what can we do with it? If we think about just putting it in a high yield savings account, Usually you get like 0.6% annual percentage yield, APY, right? So 0.6, you're not going to see a lot. At the end of 5 years, right, you're looking at maybe like 40, $50 or something. It's not a lot, but that's safe. That is a guaranteed return, and that is something that if you put that money in there, you will see return on that money. That's something that your bank, whatever means you use to put your money in a savings account, right? That is money that you will be guaranteed to see back. It is low risk for the people who are low tolerance for risk aversion, right? I think this is perfectly fine. Understanding risk aversion is something that you have to be able to identify for yourself. The context of risk aversion is pretty simple. It's just how high is your tolerance to risk? How much risk are you willing to take when it comes to investing? This is something that a lot of people don't identify until they come across the problem, and then they are forced to make that decision. Right, the context of being risk aversion, pretty straightforward, right? You have three types of people. You have people, if you're risk averse, that means that you have a low tolerance. That means that you're more likely to make the safe play. And then if you have a higher tolerance for risk, you're more willing to gamble, you're more willing to take risks, right? That means that maybe you're going for something that is a little bit more dangerous, trying to see this is what people say when they refer to as high risk, high reward. Right. So a very simple example, right? Like, let's say we have, how can you think? So let's say ban lists, right? We talked about this a lot. Ban lists, we know that Magic goes through a lot of cycles. We can kind of speculate what cards are going to get banned. So if I approach you and I said, okay, you have this $5 card, right? We'll start small. $5 card. There's a reasonable it's on the radar. It's on the chopping block. It could get banned tomorrow. If it gets banned tomorrow, let's say it goes to hypothetical $0. Not realistic. Obviously, your card won't just become completely worthless. If it doesn't become banned, it goes up to $10. So $0, $10. Those are two options tomorrow. Today's Sunday. Tomorrow's Monday. They make the announcement. You have to make your decision now. So, if, depending on your level of tolerance, right, this $5 card, it won't say $5, right? So, if I say, I want to offer you some amount of money for this card, right, and then your level of risk, your risk aversion, risk aversion, I'm not with it today, how much risk you're willing to take. So what if I offered you $4 and you think that's okay? That's you being on the conservative side, because we know that the EV on this card, right, if it's 0 or 10, right, the two options of the EV on this card is $5. In theory, this card should be worth $5. I should be paying you $5. Maybe you're not willing to take that gamble. Maybe you're happy to just take the $4 and move on. You don't want to potentially risk this card getting banned. If you hold on this card, it gets banned tomorrow. Your card is now worth $0. So that is someone who's more conservative. That is someone who is has a low tolerance for risk. They're just wanting the safe play. Whereas a higher tolerance person, that person may be holding out for trying to get $6 out of it because the EV is higher. But they know that there's a potential, again, that the card may go to 0, but they're willing to hold out for it. So understanding your level of risk is is an important criteria to understand before you get into the market, before you start buying, because you have to understand how much risk are you willing to take, how much are you willing to gamble on the prospect in the event that this doesn't pan out. So when we go back to our examples of traditional means of investment, high yield savings, right, 0.6 APY, you're not getting a lot of return on your money, but if you have $10,000, you have $100,000, you put into a traditional high yield savings account, you'll be making a decent amount of money. It's not going to be a lot of money, but it's money that you're making for free that has no risk. That has no risk to you. You just basically put in there. You can continue to put money in there. The more money you put in there, the more you'll see percentage-wise. Or rather, the more return you'll see. The percentage stays the same, the more return you'll see. And in theory, it's completely safe. Right, there are a few like these certificate deposits, CDs, money markets. These are the same things, right? Certificate deposit, it's something basically lock away that money. It offers a higher yield than your traditional savings account, but that money is locked away until it fully matures. You don't have access to that money without paying a substantial fee. So these certificate deposits, they're basically guarantees. So you choose the amount that you want to put in, and then you choose how long that you want to let sit, how long you want to let it to mature for. The longer you let it mature for, the higher percentage you're going to get. That's a catch. So if you're not going to hold it for very long, you may be better off putting it into a traditional savings account. That way you have access to the money. If you're okay with, I have this amount of money, I'm just going to lock it away and forget about it for 5 years and not think about it, you may see a higher return that way. These are things that are for people who are relatively risk averse. They don't want the risk. They don't want a high level of risk or gamble in their investment, because this is money that they're basically getting for free. There's no work required. This is money that you can put away and forget about it. Right, but realistically, I think most of us would honestly say that if we were spending $500 on a booster box versus $500 in a high yield savings account for 5 years, most of us will probably do better with the booster box. That's kind of the nature of collectibles. That's why a lot of people are buying collectibles, right? Because most things that we buy 5 years ago, this was a completely different time. If we think back 5 years ago, 2015, this was before Pokemon Go had come out. Excuse me. This was before the first kind of boom cycle for Pokemon really caught on. Pokemon Go kind of ignited that flame in people. People were going out playing Pokemon Go. People were kind of rediscovering Pokemon, getting their buying cards again, right? These are all things that people that really picked up in 2016, kind of late 2016, quarter 3, quarter 4. That was really when it started to pick up and got Pokemon just kind of back into the thick of things, kind of back into the spotlight. 2015, that predated that. Product that was available in 2015, right, is worth so much more today than it was then. Is this going to be the case going forward in 5 years? I don't know. One, I'm not a prophet, right? I've said this time and time again. I don't see the future. I have just as much information as you two. All the information is just as much in front of me as is in front of you. It's just a matter of trying to maximize our gains over the 5 years. I do suspect it is a little bit tougher now because there's a lot more product printed nowadays. We know that Pokemon naturally has a larger following. More people have returned to it, especially within the past 6 months, than they have kind of in recent history. Business Insider has reported Pokemon Go, there's been more people spending money on Pokemon Go. I think that is in nature due to the pandemic. You have a lot more people who are out taking walks, doing things that they otherwise may not have done before. So now, right, Pokemon Go, larger market, so it's possible, right, there's a larger supply of these things, so we may not see the same returns. We may not see product from 2015 having 5 years to mature nowadays has exploded in price. We may not see that same return in 5 years, but who knows? 5 years is a long time, right? The world could potentially be very different in 2025 than it is today. We can't tell, but the mantra always holds true. Time in the market is better than timing the market. Timing the market, it rewards people who are in the market for a long time. If you had bought anything that you had bought in 2015 that you held today, guaranteed you have made money. If you bought base set booster boxes in 2015, right? If you spent that $500 or whatever on just standard booster boxes, let me see what actually was in Pokemon. What was the 2015 set? Let me see if I can pull it up here. I imagine we're sometime in the black and white era of Pokemon. We're probably in Generation 5. Probably a little bit later than that. Let me see if I can get a definitive number here. think we're getting pretty close to a good idea. So the first set that was printed in 2015 looks like it was Roaring Skies from the XY series, Primal Clash rather. Yeah, Primal Clash. This set in itself hasn't gone up a dramatic amount, but in 2015, a lot of the products that were kind of at the time Flashfire, XY Flashfire, had just come out not too long ago. XY Flashfire had come out in May 7th of 2014. These boxes that if you bought $90, your case that you spent $500 on or whatever, right? These boxes are almost $2,000 today. And that's 5 years time, right? So seeing, your $100 box with a 20x return in 5 years, that's pretty phenomenal. Again, that's not to say that this is something that will be repeated, right? There's more supply. Again, people are much, much more aware of the marketplace, of what's going on right now. People have a better understanding that some of these things are worth holding on to. If I put them away, if I'm willing to squirrel them away and then just forget about them and wait, I may be able to see some returns. A lot more people are cognizant now. There's probably more people holding on to these items. But the caveat here, the thing we have to remember is that this 2020 will forever, ever, ever be remembered as the year of the pandemic, the year of COVID-19. And as such, I think a lot of product has been printed in lesser quantities than they have kind of in the past few years, probably compared to 2019, 2018, because a lot of these companies, if they had tried to hedge against a pandemic, if they had expected and they had tried to predict the same thing that a lot of us predicted back in March, that in March we had expected that there'd be a plummet in collectibles and people buying these things because people, if we're thinking about oncoming recession, if that's going to be something that's going to happen, if people are not going to have the avenue to be able to play in person, right? We thought collectibles would be going down. So a lot of these companies, if any decisions they would have made to their printing process, to how much supply they're making, how much of each set they're printing, it's very possible that there may be less of it this year compared to Q4 of 2019. If there is, and that's going to be the case, putting some product that is coming out this year away may not be the worst idea. Champions Path is kind of looking to be that premier product for Pokemon. It's a high level, it's kind of an expensive product. It's something that is in limited quantity. It's possible it does have that Charizard side. It's possible that in 5 years, right, it may be a bigger deal. There may be more in demand. We already know the price on the secret rare Charizards, right? Those are things that people seek out. Those things have a lot of value. If those prices go up in 5 years, the seal product will go up in 5 years, it may be worth holding on to. But that's hard to say. Again, it comes down to, are we beating the market? Do we think that if we put $500 in Charizard Elite Trainer boxes, for example, Champions Path Elite Trainer boxes, for example, right, for $500, you can probably buy 6 of them. They're about $90, give or take. Probably you can find them for a little bit less, $80, what have you. 6, 7 of them, 5 of them, even if we spend $100 a piece on them. Are we going to see a better return? Are we going to be able to sell these for more than, $550 that we would see in our savings account? And I think most people would think that that's the case. Again, there's some level of risk. We don't know. We don't know how much they're going to continue printing this. Maybe there's going to be no demand for this in 5 years. Maybe they decide that in 2 years they're just going to reprint Champions Path because it was such a good moneymaker for them. These are things that we can't predict. It's unlikely to happen. I'm not saying it will happen, but these are all things we have to consider. Right? Magic, kind of a different story. Reprints, prior to reprints being so prevalent, prior to them hammering out product so often, just product after product after product after product, right? Cards used to be a lot more expensive. Now, a lot of stores have had to shift. Being in the Magic singles market, you have to move away from thinking about margin. Cards are worth less because there's just been so many reprints. A lot of cards have really been beaten down. Cards that do regain slowly. But now you have to consider volume over margin because, again, cards are just inherently worth less than they were before because there's so many reprints that put a lot of downward pressure. And the cards that haven't been reprinted also have downward pressure because the thought that this card could potentially be reprinted at any time is something that you have to be cognizant of when you're holding onto your cards. So that's kind of the idea of risk aversion. That's kind of the idea of investing, right? These are all things that you have to consider. Are we really being the market? I think in most cases, yes. That's why I think most of us do this. I think that's why collectibles have become more and more and more mainstream as a means of investment now, instead of just buying like a house, for example, right? Or things that people would view, an older generation would view as a traditional investment, right? There's so many more avenues to do so. Now a lot of things, we are again approaching the point when we have collectibles are starting to become heirloom worthy. A lot of people are thinking about passing down their sports cards, there's comics, their high-end collectibles that are worth a lot of money that they've held onto. That's why CGC offers the pedigree service. You can put your name, you can put something on the back of the case with your card. That's an optional service they provide. For the people who like to collect, for the people who like to own, people who like to hold on to these things for their lifetime, and potentially and then pass it down to their kids, and they can hold on to it for their lifetimes. That's why that pedigree service is there, and this is really the direction that collectibles have started to slowly shift towards, because, right, you have a single Pokemon card that has the same value as a house now. And I would say that, just 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right, these are things that this would be a complete foreign concept for people. I know there are vintage players where the contents of their house with their vintage decks, with their vintage collection, is worth more than their house itself. And these are people that aren't living in small houses, where we have a medium, size house that's probably worth $500,000, and people contain the contents of their house inside their vintage collection, inside their cards, inside their holdings and collectibles or whatever, is worth more than the house itself, which is crazy to think about. And these are things that would be completely unheard of 10 years ago. Again, this is prior to collectibles really taking off. But in our day and age, this is where collectibles are. Do we beat the market? I think so. Again, I would encourage you to consider your level of risk aversion. How much risk can you stomach? If you always have to think about the scenario, if your entire collection of whatever you own goes to zero tomorrow, as unlikely as that is, or whatever you're buying, right? If you're putting $500 on a box, that's coming out right now, right? In Champions Path, for example, they decide to just print it continuously. They're just going to make it a continuous product. They print it next month, the next month, next month, next month, and this product just never goes up in value. Is this something you're okay with, right? And that's, again, a level of risk aversion that you have to be able to consider. You have to be able to take in for yourself. It's going to vary for every person. Some people really like gambling. Some people like being able to bet, right? Yesterday we talked a little bit about sports cards, right? For the people that do sports betting, for people that are trying to hedge their bets, right? The World Series going on right now. I had mentioned yesterday, I think one of the picks, Tampa Bay Rays, right? I think that they are the underdog. They're unlikely to win, but they've never won World Series before. How big of a deal would it be for them to win the World Series from being an underdog in the year 2020, and then some of their players just completely take off in terms of their performance, their sports cards take off, their rookie cards take off, right? All these things, right? If you buy now, before that happens, in the event that outcome does happen, who knows, right? If it's completely even, right? Assuming that it's completely fair, right? Actually don't know the results. I haven't actually checked yesterday if they actually made it MLB playoffs. Let me actually check right now. See if they've made it. So Tampa Bay is leading the series 3-2. So again, it's not completely fair because we already have some information, right? But there's 4 teams left. One of these teams is going to win the World Series, assuming completely fair, 25% to win the World Series, right? This is an outcome. It could happen. We don't know if it's going to happen. But, right, if you're willing to make that bet, if you're willing to take that gamble, if you have a high risk tolerance and you make that bet, it's a potential payday for you, right? If someone on Tampa Bay Rays wins like the MVP, right? If these are just unlikely scenarios. I'm just speaking in hypotheticals here. It's important to remember that. I'm not a prophet. I don't know. Right? If you're willing to make that gamble, it could potentially be a big payday for you. If you, again, I just keep bringing up this example because this is something that's becoming so prevalent, right? Juan Soto, he was the star hitter for the Washington Nationals last year. That was their first year winning the World Series, and his card just completely has taken off. It's continuing to sell at higher and higher numbers, right? And these are rookie cards. His rookie cards, I think, came out in the year, let's say 2016 or 15. These cards aren't old. These cards are within that 5-year time frame we were talking about, and his cards have just completely exploded in value, right? So if you're willing to take that gamble with the Tampa Bay Rays, there could be something there for you. Just, again, risk aversion. How much are you willing to bet on the market? How much are you willing to bet, right? Because in the event that the Tampa Bays don't win, right, they don't make it to World Series, it completely falls flat, right? You're holding on to a bunch of rookies where, well, maybe you have to wait until they maybe take off next year, for example, right? And who knows? And obviously next year is a much harder bet, because right now it's just not one team trying to make the World Series and win, right? You have a bunch of teams. So risk aversion, take that in consideration. Make sure what you're doing is going to legitimately beat the market, right? Some people, if you don't like the level of risk and you can afford it, maybe sometimes you're better off just putting the money into a savings account, just putting a small contribution. Is it glamorous? Is it pretty? Not really. But at the end of the day, you will know that you have a fallback. You will have your savings account. You will have that money that is locked away. And if you need access to it in the case of emergency, in the case of COVID-19, something hit, and you had a rough month, rough quarter, rough year, you have that money to fall back on. That's always something to consider before you go too deep into the world of investing, before you start putting money into things that may or may not pay off for you in the long run. Moving onwards, we'll kind of look at PWCC. We have seen most of the auctions come up. They are now live for us on their website. We do see the lots coming out for this month. I'm going to swap over to my screen share, and we'll kind of take a look at some of the items that are available right now. So first we'll just look at Pokemon. Pokemon is just kind of at the forefront. This is what everyone's thinking about. These are the items that are available. You actually can't click on a lot themselves. If I click on item, I actually can't zoom in on the image. So we just have to go out in the title. We see a lot of Japanese cards. I do want to note that Japanese cards, I think, in my mind, are undervalued. They are worth a little bit less than their direct English counterpart, right? Your base set Charizard right here, right? This is 1996. This is actually 3 years older than base set Pokemon. Base set Pokemon for English didn't come out to US until 1999, right? 1996 was when the first game was Pokemon first started to exist in Japan. We have some promos that are actually predating that. You have promos from 1995 even. But here we have I just went past it. Right, we just have the base set, Hollow Charizard. I think these cards are pretty underpriced relative to where the English market is right now. And yesterday I kind of discussed this as being trying to think about the next best thing, right? What can you be buying next? What is the next thing to be buying? Because for most of us, the boat on base set Charizards have already sailed. And I think that it's unfortunate, right, if you're in that market. But, right, like, you have to consider, is it the worst thing to be settling, if you're a Charizard collector, if you want to own a Charizard, to settle for a Japanese copy? And when I say settle, right, you're not taking something that is any less. It's just simply a foreign card. This is actually the original printing of Charizard. But is it really going to be worth whatever fraction of the English base set is? Most of us associate with English because that's what we know. But that leaves some room. Japanese copies could be underpriced. The Japanese market, again, that's where Pokemon originated. There is a huge market in Japan for Japanese cards. It hasn't really been something that's caught on. The beauty of Pokemon is that they've made it so universal. Pokemon is printed in so many different languages nowadays. But the original Japanese cards, I think, will always kind of have a special place. They are a little bit more common than English cards, so there's kind of that lower ceiling where how high these can get. But I think that there's still something there. Even just in the context of modern day Japanese cards, I think a lot of what Japan does with Pokemon, with what they do, how they print their cards, is very unique. It's very cool. So one of the things I have here, for example, this is a GX Tag Team High Class Booster Box. This is a slightly different printing. This is what some of the premium booster boxes actually look like in Japan. So this is kind of their iteration of Hidden Fates, kind of that premium fall product that they've started to come out with. So there are cards in here that this is a reprint set. So there's no new cards. The cards in here are reprints of some of their previous sets, some of the GXs, tag teams, etc. So one of the things that makes this unique, kind of in a similar way that Hidden Fates is unique, Hidden Fates is originally a derivative of Ultra Shiny GX, which is the Japanese set that was made the year before this. Ultra Shiny GX, it had the super shiny cards, kind of the same hollowing as Hidden Fates. At the time, we didn't know that Hidden Fates was going to be released yet, but that really did spur kind of the whole chase for the super shinies that came in it. Those boxes, when I was selling them, I had some boxes I was even selling at my most recent Pokemon event when I hosted it last December, right, 10 months ago. I was selling those boxes for probably about $120. Those boxes are pushing $200 now, and it's only been a few months. Again, that's just the level of scarcity. Those cards are still in demand. You can still get the Japanese ultra shiny Charizard out of there, same as English. It's just, again, in Japanese, is it going to be worth a fraction of the price when it's just as rare? I don't think so. And again, in my mind, that's what makes it underpriced, right? These are things that would be worth considering. Japanese cards, they also do something pretty cool. One of the things that they have adopted that they haven't done before in this set, in this high class these high class packs, is they actually have done something called God packs. This is something that is a little bit more prevalent in other Japanese card games. It hasn't really reached the English market yet, but these cards, each pack has 11 cards, and then one box has 10 packs. Approximately one box, one per case. So that's roughly one in like 200 packs, give or take. It's not an exact number. You're not guaranteed to get one per case. I think you usually are, but don't hold me to that. I haven't opened very much of this product. There is one booster packs where all 11 cards will be secret rare. They'll be secret rare, including the energy inside each pack, and it makes it a God pack. Again, not something that's really caught on, but this is something that's very cool. It helps sell the product because you always have that lure of your $10 booster box, or whatever. It has a potential for it. $10 booster box. $10 booster packs is a $100 booster box. $10 booster pack has a potential. You could potentially be opening up, right, like $200 worth of rares inside, give or take. Is it likely? No, but it makes for a great story. This is something that helps sell the product. A lot of people do like to open up booster products, right? This isn't something that's foreign to most of us who have done this. People like to open these up, and they are cool, right? That's kind of the nature, that it helps sell a product, and I think that's something that it does very well. So one of the cards that I do like mentioned is the Moltres Arcanine Zapdos, right? The three birds. The card in English, the English printing, if I type in that card, if I look on TCG Player, there are two printings of that card. You have the ultra rare printing from Hidden Fates. Again, this is what I could find. And then you have the promo that came in the Sun and Moon tins, I believe. This is the ultra rare version that comes in this box. This is one of about 60 or so secret rares. This is collector number 226 out of 173. This is what the card looks like. This version does not exist in English. There are some issues. You can't play Japanese cards in the English TCG. I think this does kind of put a damper on the price as well, because people want their cards to be playable. But again, from a collector perspective, right, this is about as cool of a card as you can get. I'm sure you can't see it, but if I bring it up in the camera, I don't think it'll zoom in enough for you to see it here. You can't quite see it, but this card is actually textured as well. It's textured the same way the GX cards are So these cards, very cool. This is something you can only get inside these. This is not something that's been brought to the US yet. So these things, very, very collectible. You can't play them. So in theory, any value that is attached to this card is purely for collectability. And the fact that this card is not worthless, the fact that people buy these cards, the fact that people want these cards, again, indicates that there is a very real market for Japanese cards, even in America. People do want these Japanese cards, again, simply because they look cool. This card looks much cooler than the Hidden Fates version, the version that you can just get looking on TCG Player, right? The Hidden Fates version, the card's not super playable. This card's only about $4. There's no shortage of buying copies in the like $4 range. But this card, I was selling this eBay, I want to say, for like $40-ish at one point. I recently found this copy. I actually need to update my eBay listings. But the fact that this card basically unplayable, but there is a market, there's demand for this card, indicates that the market for Japanese cards does exist. And I will stand by the fact that I do think they're underpriced. We have touched on it briefly before, and I've not done so in large quantities, but promos, Japanese promos, have a lot of value. They do a lot of very cool things. They do a lot of crossovers, right? We've seen 7-Eleven promos. There's been McDonald's promos. There's been promos with a lot of just kind of cross collaborations with other Japanese companies. Uniqlo has done promos for Pokemon, right? So one of the things we talked about is these screen promos, right? This was a Tokyo exhibit where they featured this art. They did cross collaboration where basically these promo cards were given away at just for showing up to exhibitions. Some of these are more rare than others. The Pikachu and the Mimikyu are particularly expensive. These cards, I have actually quite a stack here, so this is just kind of me flexing, I guess. So these cards, at my Pokemon event in December, when I last vended the regionals, these were selling at the booth for $15. These cards, you can't find them on eBay for less than like $45 now. And when we revisit the TCG Player, or when we revisit the PWCC auctions, we can see that these cards are actually quite a bit more expensive than that now. We're going to shift back to PWCC. We're going to take a look. We're just kind of go through very quickly, just to kind of have a preview of what we're looking at. Back to sharing my screen here. So I think there's a lot of Japanese cards here. A lot of these, again, I think are reasonably underpriced, right? There's a base set Holo Charizard. I think it's very possible that, you know, depending on how many people see this as well, these may be worth buying if you can't afford, or you're looking for something that's a little bit different than the traditional English promos. It may be worth looking at some of these Japanese cards and buying them. And if in the future they do explode, it's possible these explode in the Japanese market, right? There's no harm in holding them. So there's a lot of like Japanese promos here. A lot of these completely predate English cards, right? We're looking at cards in 1998. Again, this is pre English cards being printed. This was before these cards had come to America. So completely different. 1999 is when we first see these. We have your premium cards here, right? We have first edition Holo Blastoise, PSA 8, PSA 9. We have a BGS thick stamp, right? We have a bunch of first edition Charizards here. It'll be interesting to see how these do in the current era, right? We have recently seen these explode in prices. We don't really see the most, let me get more items on page here. We've seen how much 10s go for, and now we have to start thinking, again, what is the next best thing? What happens if people can't afford a 10? A 10 will always have that giant premium over the rest of them, because a 10 is quite literally a flawless card, and now people are going to have to start thinking, well, if a 9 is out of my reach, right, what am I going to have to pay on a PSA 10 is out of my reach? What do I have to pay on a 9, right? You have PSA 9s, BGS 9s. Right now we're looking at 8.5s. There's a bunch of 7s. There's 4 PSA and BGS 7s here, right? So total listings, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 Charizards on here. There's 17 Charizards out there. So there's a pretty large spread on condition, right? We have some as low as 2s. We have a 9.5, the thick stamp, where the first edition stamp is very pronounced, right? So there's a pretty large spread on. We'll have to see how these do. We keep going. There's a bunch of first edition base set on here, right? These are always going to kind of be the cards that will be the biggest deal. We have a first edition Charmander card, PSA 10 Gem Mint, right? I think these are probably in the 2,000 plus range. Last month, I think I couldn't remember exactly what they closed at last month, but these cards, these starters, they're so iconic. People want these. People will be buying these, so watch out for these. There's still the 10s. We have a CGC 10, a pristine on here. Getting a 10 from CGC is incredibly difficult. They are very, very strict when it comes to grading. So we'll have to see how this does. And this will also, again, be kind of indicative of CGC slowly permeating into the marketplace, becoming a bigger and bigger deal as people are maybe starting to consider, maybe I should send cards off to CGC because I don't want to wait the 6 to 8 months that you need to be waiting to get cards back from Beckett, to get cards back from PSA at this point. We have some Yellow Cheeks Pikachu. These aren't the premium ones. These aren't the misprint ones. You want the ones with red cheeks. Those are the expensive ones. So nothing that's kind of like truly out of the norm, right? We have a 10 Charizard. This is it looks like unlimited, so not shadowless, but we'll have to see how this does, right? This is a PSA Gem Mint 10, so that should still fetch quite the price. There's a lot of shadowless cards down here. There's shadowless Charizards. There's 5 total shadowless Charizards, including a 9.5. Right, we'll have to see how those do. There's some more unlimited Charizards down here. We have a basic booster box Blue Wing. I believe the variation in the wing is indicative of the country that was printed in. There are some different variations on that. There are some German Charizards as well. I know that foreign cards have started to become more and more popular, as they started out as a way for people to think that, oh, this is a cheaper variation, and for the most part they are cheaper, but they're slowly starting to catch on again as people have realized that maybe their English premium grade, the English first edition Charizard PSA 10 maybe unattainable, right? We have to see how a German first edition PSA 10 does, right? How close does it come? I imagine it'll be substantially lower, but we have to start thinking these all have to stay within kind of the same relative spread. So if you had a German Charizard in decent condition, it may have gone up in price in the meanwhile. There's a lot of Fossil here, first edition Fossil, so nothing that is too extreme. A lot of these are worth watching. There's a lot of different cards. There's 3 boxes of first edition Fossil, right? We all know sealed product has jumped up pretty substantially. We have a larger listing, a much larger offering of CGC cards compared to what we have seen before. Most of these are foreign, that's fine. But there's the fact that there's a pretty wide spread means that there's something here for everyone. For collectors, I think that PWCC will always be a good place. You know that you're going to get something that is legit. You don't have to worry about being scammed on eBay. We have done an episode on PWCC before. We've kind of talked about it, and we know what kind of the scope of PWCC has to offer. So you can kind of look here. We have more jungle. So we're still kind of solid in the WotC era. We just see the majority of these cards, WotC era, right? These are kind of the biggest things that people are wanting to buy, people are wanting to hold on to right now, right? We're still first edition. We're back to kind of a wave of Japanese cards. We have a lot of promos. A lot of these promos are pretty neat. Again, completely different realm, but we do have to think about, is it worth buying? Because these could very well be underpriced relative to the English market, and some of these cards are incredibly rare, right? If we look at a BGS, there's a BGS 2000 Pokemon Japanese promo 500 point fan club Hollow Eevee BGS 9.5. This is population 1 of 7. There are just 2 that are graded higher than this, so this is the 3rd highest copy of this card graded in the world. Some of these point-based cards, you had to do something that would require you to get points, right? We have the 700 point fan club here, Porygon. You have to do things, acquire these points, you send them in, and then you basically redeem tickets or whatever, and then this helps you get the promo. A lot of these are quite rare, right? This is, again, 2000. Some of these promos don't actually have an English version. A lot of the cards in Japanese have made their way to the English market in one form or another, but some of these promos, they only exist in Japanese, and it really, really does make them unique compared to English cards. So there is definitely a following for these. Some people like to collect them. Some people may not even be aware that these exist. A lot of people, when I was vending regionals for Pokemon, a lot of people were saying, wow, this promo is awesome. I've never seen this promo before. Yeah, you haven't seen this promo before because these don't exist in English. And a lot of people just, wow, this is awesome. I just want to buy this because it just adds to my collection of Porygon, Eevee, Charizard. You know, these promos that exist in Japanese that don't exist in English, that people would not have seen before. And I think that is something that is a growing market. I think that's something that is worth taking advantage of. At the very least, it's worth considering. It's worth looking at. Still kind of in the Neo Genesis now, we do have a graded Pokemon Silver version. This is factory sealed. This is graded. I don't know enough about sealed video games, but I know that this is definitely a big deal for people. This is something that people like. Having these sealed is something that's pretty cool, right? We're in first edition Rocket now. There's a bunch of Charizards down here. Kind of the same deal. WotC era, these will always be a big deal for people. People will always be willing to buy these. There's first edition Team Rocket boxes. These boxes have exploded in value. Again, more Japanese promo cards. Expedition is one of those sets that was not opened very widely. Again, to my understanding, this is kind of past the point when I was really dealing with Pokemon cards. So growing up as a child, I kind of fell off the radar as being cool for me. Little did I know, right? So a lot of these promos, it's worth looking at. I keep saying this again and again. Japanese VS. This was kind of their iteration of the Gym Heroes Gym Challenge, right? A lot of these don't exist in English. Not all these. Some of these do. Some of these don't. It does require a little bit of digging to figure out which promos have made the transition over. There's Koro Shining Muse, right? These are definitely pretty cool. There's a lot of stuff here. I'm not going to go through everything. We're still in Neo sets, right? We go back to some Japanese. A lot of these cards, promos, we see a lot of promos, right? This is kind of the era of McDonald's promos when there was a crossover between McDonald's and Pokemon, right? This is kind of a big deal at the time. Legendary Collection, these reverse hollows, these have a very unique folding process. A lot of people do like these. This PSA 10 Gem Mint reverse fold Dark Dragonite, pretty big deal. I imagine that one will be worth a fair amount. So a lot of these cards, right, these are really kind of the premier collector pieces. Some of these, depending on the price, depending on how many people you're fighting, are worth considering as long-term investments. I don't see any reason for these to go down, especially when you're talking about some of these as being as nice of a condition as there are out there. So I think no matter what, it's worth looking at, again, just to keep, at the very least, if you don't have the money to spend and buy some of these high-level cards, some of these, investment pieces that are probably going to be hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, especially for the first edition base set, it is worth considering watching, just, again, to keep a pulse on the market, to have an idea of what the market is doing, what direction it's going, and being able to have an idea of what should you do with Pokemon. Like, if you have old cards that you've dug up, maybe consider getting them graded if you want to put them out there in the market for sale, right? It'll help you kind of guide your decision. If you're looking to invest, maybe there's some pieces worth fighting. It may be a tough point right now to buy. I think some of these prices will probably be higher prices than what we should normally be expecting, mainly because there's going to be so many people in the market trying to fight right now. So it is something worth considering. If you are looking to invest, you do have to be able to get in at the right point. Again, I think the nature of PWCC, because there's so much attention, there's so much visibility on the market right now, you are probably going to be paying a little bit more than you should. Don't get caught up in that hype. Look at do your market research price, look at some of the past historical trends, and figure out what you can afford to be paying, what you should be paying, what does the market dictate that you should pay, so that you're not overpaying, you're not getting caught up in a bid war with someone else, you're not overpaying in a position you don't have to, you're not really getting caught up in a lot of that kind of hustle and bustle, the feeling of FOMO, because, again, there will be other opportunities to buy these cards. Some of them more rare than others. Some of them you may have to wait longer. But in the context of investing, if we're going to potentially be waiting 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, who knows how long on some of these cards, if you don't find the deal right now, it's possible you find the deal in the future. It's not worth getting caught up in the hype, getting caught up in the FOMO, to try and overpay on something that is going to come back and bite you down the road. That being said, I mentioned earlier in the episode, time in the market beats timing the market. There is some level of urgency. There is some sense of wanting to buy this sooner rather than later. The longer you are, the more likely you will be rewarded. Again, there will be more opportunities for you to sell. Maybe someone is out there wanting to buy that card that you happen to have, and maybe they're willing to pay whatever it takes to get it because they just can't find it. Those people exist. It's about connecting the buyer to seller. The longer you're on the market, the more opportunities you will have to see this. And I think that is why you want to be in the market for as long as possible. If you can afford to invest, if you can afford to put your money out there and make it work for you, then being in the market for a longer period of time will ultimately reward you in the long run. And that's what being an investor is about. That's what buying into the market, that's what holding onto these assets will do for you long term. So with that, we'll go and wrap up today's episode. There are some other PWCC things that we'll cover. We'll talk a little bit about Magic probably next week. We'll kind of review some of the things there. So that being said, thank you always for listening. As always, I'm on Twitter at Edwin13. Feel free to hit me up with questions, thoughts, feedback, whatever. I always respond to people. I always listen. I always take the feedback to heart. You can find social media sites for Vermilion on the right. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe, and we'll be back here